Good morning in Washington, good afternoon in Ukraine and elsewhere in Europe, including in Russia. My name is John Herbst, and I run the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. We'll have now another event on Moscow's war on Ukraine. We've done over a dozen of these since Moscow's big invasion 10 and a half months ago. We have a terrific panel with us today. We have Deborah Kagan, who's a Distinguished Energy Fellow at the Transatlantic Leadership Network. We have Leonid Guzman, a significant Moscow opposition politician and analyst. We have retired General Wes Clark, the former Supreme Allied Commander for Europe. And we have former Minister of Defense, Andriy Zakhranuk of Ukraine, who's a Distinguished Fellow at the Eurasia Center. We are going to start off today with Andriy Zakhranuk, because he wrote a very, very provocative and I think insightful article for foreign policy on the need to retake Crimea, for Ukraine to retake Crimea. So we'll start with him. Andriy, you recently wrote, again, this article on not just the importance, but the viability of Ukraine taking back Crimea from Moscow. As you know, the West has been consistently cautious in providing weapons out of concern for, quote unquote, provoking the Kremlin. Please tell us why and how Ukraine can take back the peninsula.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. And thank you for highlighting that article. I hope more people will read it. First of all, I think that the fear of provoking Kremlin should be completely out of the agenda right now, because Kremlin is engaged in the war, which is the largest war in Europe since World War II. And constant concerns of not to provoke. We're hearing this for years. I mean, whoever been engaged in European security or European geopolitics or anything to do with Ukraine is already, honestly, sorry for like language, but sick and tired of hearing about like don't provoke Kremlin. You know, the appeasement doesn't work with Kremlin. The fear doesn't work with Kremlin. And so that argument should be totally off the table. And I can tell you that, Ukrainians are not using that argument like at all. So for us, it doesn't work. Basically, so that's just the first remark. But indeed, we constantly hear from many observers, from journalists, from politicians, from analysts that Crimea should be not a part of this campaign. Or they are like worried that being part of this campaign, this war will take longer than needed. Whatever they assume by when they say that longer than needed, you know. So their arguments are usually is like military difficulty, the escalation risks, the reintegration complications. Some people say that it's non-essential because Ukraine can continue developing even with Crimea being so far still a matter of dispute, which we don't believe it's a dispute. We believe it's just an outright occupation. So there is nothing to dispute here. Then some actually suggest seriously that we bargain Crimea in exchange for peace. Which we believe is quite naive and does not like include the understanding of the essence of this war. So we do believe that Crimea is essential. We are absolutely certain that until Crimea is liberated, Ukraine will not be safe, and actually the world is not be safe, and European community and even Eurasian community is not going to be safe, because from Crimea, Russia, Putin's regime projects power to many different regions. Russians are have turned Crimea into a massive military base, which they're going to use to attack Ukraine, and which they do right now, but they will use it until they own it. And of course, the Black Sea factor. Black Sea is a whole massive geopolitical topic, but Crimea is absolutely critical for Russia to control the Black Sea, because they assume the territorial waters of Ukraine and the exclusive economic zone of Ukraine, which was associated with Crimea, is now Russian. So while if you look at the map of controlling of like which country has which chunk of Black Sea, so legally Russia has a quite small chunk of the Black Sea, but with Crimea and with occupation of Azov Sea, they essentially control the whole northern part of the Black Sea and the whole Sea of Azov. And many analysts do not comprehend the meaning and the importance of the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea in overall politician, economic life, and strategic like meaning. One of the examples is, of course, this the food crisis which we have right now around the world. It's absolutely directly connected to the occupation of the Black Sea and Crimea. But also, it's just many people need to completely reassess the meaning of this whole region for the global security as in total. We believe that liberation of Crimea is absolutely possible. We're planning to continue liberate of Ukraine, including Crimea. We don't think that they can be like divided. And there are a number of arguments about this. So one of the arguments is the strategic precedent. So the Crimean occupation and deoccupation will set up a very important precedent. Basically, the help which Ukraine receives from the global community in the fight against Russian occupation is very much about this setting up a proper strategic precedent. So to save the world order, to keep the world order intact, and not to allow such things as we experience right now to happen. Without Crimea, without addressing Crimea, this strategic precedent is not going to be complete. And actually, it will set up a negative strategic precedent, because even though Ukraine receives a massive support from the whole democratic community, we still would, keep Crimea intact, and essentially Russia can keep it, which is a very wrong message if we send that message. So that's one important part. The other important part is that a strategy needs to be consistent. So we're either fighting against imperial, totalitarian, Russian regime, or we don't. And since we do, that should be complete. So we need to be consistent. So if Russia needs to be responsible for its actions, it needs to be responsible completely, not just like partly, like we liberate most of Ukraine, but not all of it. I mean, that's a wrong strategy, and we shouldn't be following that strategy. There's a lot of discussions about lots of wrong narratives which are persistent in the information space of the West. Particularly, some of them were sent by Russians, and somehow they rooted in understanding of the Crimean issues. For example, one of the biggest ones is that Crimea has some special meaning for Russia. It has some special historic connection for Russia. And that's why there is some kind of explanation why suddenly Crimea now have to belong to Russia, despite the international law. Well, this is a completely fake argument, and it's invalid, and it's irrelevant to the current situation. And in the article, I explain why. Crimea is not closer to Russia than any other former part of the empire. Like, we can discuss many of them. Yes, it's been part of Russia for some time, but it never been part of Russia always. And it legitimately became part of Ukraine, and there's massive amount of people which would be absolutely happy to see it return to the democratic world, to the free world, to the free community. So just to conclude, there's many details about how exactly Crimea is going to be liberated, whether there is a diplomatic solution to this, whether there is a military solution to this, and we can discuss this all. And there are options. But I have to say that the most important thing is that we need to be very consistent with the strategy, and we need to have a strategic determination. So whatever the way Crimea has to be liberated, it must be liberated, and there is absolutely shouldn't be any doubts about that. Thank you.
Well, Andrei, thank you. Wes, besides having been SACEUR for Europe, you've been one of the most prominent commentators on the war in Ukraine, especially since Moscow's February invasion. Do you believe Ukraine can take back Crimea at this moment, or take steps now towards taking it back? If yes, how would this proceed? If not, what weapon systems would Ukraine need from the West to do this?
Well, thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be with you and this distinguished panel this morning on this important issue. I think this issue of Crimea is central to the whole discussion and strategic objectives of the war. Russia crossed the line in 2014 with the invasion of Ukraine and the seizure of Crimea. It's been under sanctions ever since for the illegal occupation. The United States and most of the powers of the world in the aftermath of World War I 100 years ago tried to set up a legal structure. It collapsed in 1933, 34, the League of Nations. The United States brought it back with the United Nations. After World War II, it served us well, and now Putin has not only challenged it, but moved against it. As the US administration said, this is about the structure of the international community, this war is. And so we have to see it through to its conclusion. Can Ukraine regain control of Crimea? The answer is absolutely yes. Does it have what it needs to do that? Not yet. So I think the administration has crossed a major threshold with the announcement of sending the Bradley fighting vehicles and the discussion of the M1 tanks. There's more to be done, but essentially, Ukraine needs the ability not only to defend itself, which we're providing with NASAMS and Patriots, and which Ukraine itself has artfully done with its own air defense. Yes, that needs to be strengthened, but Ukraine needs offensive capabilities. This starts with winning the counterfire battle, more artillery, longer ranged weapons, and greater command and control and intelligence support. It also requires the long range loitering drones like the Switchblade 600. And if you can win the counterfire battle, you can then advance. And to advance, we need not only the strong, courageous infantrymen that Ukraine has created, but we need armored vehicles, self-propelled artillery, attack helicopters, and aircraft. And so it's time for Ukraine to get access to Western aircraft. If the Swedes give Viggen, that's fine, but we should be providing F-16s, we should be providing A-10s. We should be providing ATACMS, Switchblade 600 loitering drones. It's time for Ukraine to get the M1 tank, the Leopard, the Challenger 2. These need to be introduced with substantial maintenance behind them. And the United States needs, in support, to mobilize further its own industrial base so that we're not having to simply draw out US equipment, but we're actually strengthening ourselves as a show of deterrence and an indication to Russia that you can't outmatch us. Thank you.
Wes, thank you very much. Deborah, France, Germany, and the US recently announced they're sending finally more armored personnel carriers to Ukraine, more advanced APCs to Ukraine. Germany is now also sending Patriots following the US. What impact, if any, of this would have on Ukraine's war effort? Related to this too, it looks like France and Finland and others are strongly encouraging Germany to send those Leopard tanks. The German foreign minister was just in Kyiv and went to Kharkiv with the Ukrainian foreign minister, Kuleba. And she's also talking about Germany providing more aid to Ukraine. What's going on here? And what impact will this have?
So I don't want to be accused of dissing allies, but let me just say that I'm going to build on what General Clark just said. This requires firmer U.S. leadership. And allies, as a rule of thumb, as General Clark knows, are not going to stick their neck out unless the U.S. does so first. That's what global leadership is all about. And Germany finally did the right thing on a couple of these weapon systems, but it took an enormous amount of cajoling. And also, it took other countries willing to say things publicly, which I think were embarrassing for Germany. And that's why they finally turned the corner on some of this. But I do think that before Germany considers sending main battle tanks, that the U.S. will have to make it very clear that they want them to do this. This is going back to what General Clark said about the M1s. If the U.S. does not say, we want you to send main battle tanks. There's going to be a meeting in Ramstein next week on the 20th. A lot of defense ministers will be there from the Ukrainian contact group. It would be very useful and important and prudent for Secretary Austin to say, we need countries to send main battle tanks to Ukraine. We need countries to start accepting the fact that Ukraine will need aircraft to fight this war. And we need to stop playing games, as the former minister has said, about using Crimea as a negotiating chip. To which I would just say, it's the equivalent of saying, let's just let Germany keep Sudetenland and Gdańsk, Gdynia, and Sopo and call it a day. No one was willing to do that during World War II. We shouldn't be willing to do it now. You should not be rewarding evil for bad behavior. And I do think that there is a lot more that allies can do. And there's a lot that allies are doing behind the scenes that they're not taking credit for. But Ray, you raised Finland. So Finland has done 11 tranches of military aid to Ukraine, totaling almost 109 million euros. For a country of 5.5 million, that is substantial. And part of the issue here is Finland, the parliamentarians are now putting pressure on Germany so that they can send their Leopards to Ukraine. So I think what you have is two things. One, I think you need the United States to wield a much heavier hand, gloved or ungloved, on allies to move off the dime and go to this next stage. And the second part of this is I think you are seeing some separation inside of the alliance, not in a bad way, but in a good way, where other countries now are speaking up and telling Germany, you have this industrial base, you have these weapons, you have the capability of saying yes and moving forward. And they're not afraid to put this pressure on Germany publicly, which is a fundamental change over where we were before. Oh, and they're also doing it to France, which I think has resulted in France taking a new position as well. And again, we talk about alliance unity, but sometimes that little bit of disunity under the surface is a good thing.
That's a very smart observation, Deborah. Thank you. Leonid, Andrei's not the only one who's been writing thought-provoking pieces. You wrote a wonderful piece saying that for its own good, Russia needs to lose the war of aggression in Ukraine. Some Western leaders are nervous about this. Do you believe that a successful Ukrainian offensive in Crimea would help Putin rally support in Russia for this war? And why do you think Putin offered the Orthodox Christmas ceasefire last week?
Thank you, John. For your first question, yes and no at the same time. No, because Putin has no problem with ordinary Russians. Ordinary Russians who still support him, unfortunately, they do believe that NATO, led by United States, attacked us, and that you all want to destroy us, and we, taking into account your power, your forces, defend ourselves quite successfully. In addition, people do not threat for him, since the people in Russia do not decide anything. We are not democracy, we are a dictatorship. Of course, he understands that there is a part of the people of Russia who dislike him very much, educated and young residents of big cities. But they do not have the capacity to organize a revolution or the protests which could be dangerous for his regime. The more problematic thing for him, and in this case, he really thinks about the consequences of his actions on the Ukrainian territory. It's the mood of the elite, especially top 10,000s. It's dangerous for him. They are disappointed in him, not because he involves them in a crime, but they're very cynical, but because he's losing. So far, maintaining loyalty seems safer to them than giving up loyalty. But this may change, and Putin understands it. If he starts winning, the situation will become much safer for him. It's why he is so active in trying to receive even partial victories, like now in Donetsk region. If Putin, God forbid, wins, this will rally the elite around him. He will become even more dangerous for the whole world and for our own country. There is no split of elites yet. The speeches of people like Girkin, for example, they're not dangerous. He's a war criminal, of course, but no one respects him. But Putin, realizing the potential threat of himself from the discontent of the elites, follows the way of Ivan the Terrible and builds a parallel state, опричнина. I don't know, do you know this word, опричнина? It's a parallel state of Ivan the Terrible. And the most famous опричниks are Prigozhin and Kadyrov. They, like Ivan's опричниks, live according to another laws in another state. And this is Putin's message to his close associates. Look, guys, I have other people besides you. Be careful. I have them. And about this Christmas strange idea, this is just one of the manifestations of his inadequacy. It was a message to the leaders of the West. Look, I am peace-loving. I do not want the war. So make the Ukrainians choose fear. Because the stable choose fear, of course, in his interests. But of course, he lost nobody trusted him, not in Ukraine or in the rest of the world. That's it.
Okay, Leonid, thank you. For our listening audience, the Oprichna were kind of like a police/paramilitary organization, which was like, or a presidential guard that dominated Russian politics in Ivan's time and terrorized the other elites, the elite in Moscow at the time. Okay, Wes, back to you. There has been much talk about a new Russian mobilization to launch a major offensive either from Belarus to take Kiev or in Donbass or in the Zaporizhia Oblast. Do you see a new offensive coming, and what would be the results?
John, I do see an offensive coming. I think that Russia right now is on a strategic defensive, but it's attempting to bleed Ukraine, especially with the fighting around Bakhmut, while Putin has time to mobilize and work his next courses of action. I think a strategic offensive in the spring or in the early summer by Russia is a distinct possibility. Where it falls remains to be determined. Probably not in the south because it would require recrossing the Dnieper, but it could happen through Belarus, or it could happen again in the east. Will it have the full strength and the modernized equipment that the Russian first offensive had? Probably not. But you can be sure that behind the scenes, Russia is scrambling to rebuild those forces, begging Iran and North Korea and China for military assistance. And those nations are looking at the West to see their response. So I think the strength of this Russian offensive is indeterminable at this time. But I do foresee that Russia is not going to simply remain indefinitely on the strategic defensive.
Okay, thank you. Andrei, how might a major Ukrainian offensive against Crimea impact its ability to defend against the Russian offensive either from Belarus or in the Donbass region?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that most likely the operation in Crimea will happen when we liberate the rest of the country. So, which means that Russia will spend a massive amount of its available forces in an attempt to to basically either occupy or at least defend some of their positions right now. So we do believe that they would be trying, but we need to understand that Russian capabilities as a whole, not just like Crimean capabilities and then the other capabilities, because they move them back and forth all the time until we address the issue of the Crimean bridge and the Perekop Isthmus and a couple other roads which connect Crimea with the mainland, because then the troops will be blocked in Crimea, and it would be much more difficult to move them. So, so we do believe that Russian forces are exhausted to a large extent. We see them not being able to achieve any operational goals, and the achievements or at least some kind of a relative progress, if we may call it that way, even in Donbass, is not convincing, because they still struggling there, and that assuming that they forgot about all other directions and focused all their might on one. So by the time when we push them out of the rest of Ukraine, we believe that they would be not in a state that they would be able to defend Crimea successfully.
Andrei, you just said something very important. I just want to confirm it. So what you're suggesting is that in the near term, Ukraine might take steps, again, to make supply to Crimea very difficult by at least partly, if not entirely, cutting the land bridge, as well as taking down completely the bridge over the Straits of Kerch. Is that what you're...
The actual campaign plan in Crimea could be different. We're not currently in a position to say how definitely it's going to look like. There are a number of options, but certainly the fact that that Russia is using land bridge as the military corridor for their equipment is obviously impacting the state of capabilities in Crimea. So of course we need to address that issue.
Right, that's a great vulnerability for the Kremlin. All right, let me ask you one more question on the offensive, the current situation. Ukraine continues to hold Bakhmut, and there was a deadline in the Kremlin to take it over a month ago. There's now a great question about what's going on in Soledar. The Russians are claiming, at least some Russians are claiming they have it. Their military bloggers are saying that's not true. What is the situation there as best you can tell?
I have to remind that the first deadline to take Donbass, all of it, was actually 9th of May of this year.
Correct. That's all. You're right.
Because that's not the first time they decided to kind of refocus and focus on one operational direction.
Right.
And that didn't work out, and it doesn't work out right now. Yes, we have lots of people right now in Soledar. We have our troops there. We have some of our correspondents there. There are like pictures from today from that town. Same thing as with Bakhmut. So the claims that it's taken are obviously this is not the fact. This is not true. Of course, they are trying to surround it. They're trying to advance there. Same with Bakhmut, but it's not successful.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. Kevin McCarthy just became speaker after 15 votes. And in the process, reportedly, I stress that word reportedly, as opposed to we knowing for sure, made a commitment to cut U.S. assistance to Ukraine. Do you believe that a small minority of Republicans are in a position to do that? Condi Rice and Bob Gates just wrote an excellent op-ed calling on sending more advanced weapons to Ukraine to help achieve a victory sooner, since Putin is counting on Western support to wane. You've already noted growing strength in Europe for providing more to Ukraine. Do you think that this news about the alleged McCarthy commitment underscores the wisdom of the recommendations from Rice and Gates?
It underscores the wisdom, but I think it also underscores something else, that the United States has not done, especially the administration has not done a very good job of strategic communications on this. So if they had done a good job, they would be telling these members of Congress, and not only on the right, but on the left, that here's the investment that we're making in Ukraine versus the investment we would have to be making in our own military in terms of not only equipment, but in terms of blood and treasure. It does not also talk about how there's probably, and I look to General Clark here, but I think this is probably the largest instance of burden sharing on the part of allies in well over 35 to 40 years. When you look at per capita, the amount of equipment that has been supplied to Ukraine and other assistance, it dwarfs anything else we've seen within NATO or the EU previously, especially in NATO. But we're not conveying that. When I talk to members of Congress, when I talk to their staff, when I talk to Americans on the street, they're totally unaware of what our other allies in Europe are doing. They are totally unaware of how the US military is learning from this war and changing its dynamics of how it sources equipment, what's the next generation of equipment. I leave it to General Clark, but I read a very good article this week about how Army is very much looking forward to see how Bradley performs in Ukraine, because they're looking at their next generation of infantry fighting vehicle. And so they've already made improvements to the 3 version and the 4 version, and they want to see what happens in Ukraine. None of this is being broadcast very widely. And I think this is something that has to be said to the American people, because there are, it's in the middle of a war, we should not be talking about cost savings in terms of dollars and cents, but it's inevitable, especially with the high inflation in this country and people being trench and isolationists in some cases. But if we're going to have that conversation, then we need to be honest and tell the American people that here's what you're saving here. This is now a generation of weapon systems that is going to be less and will be more successful against China because of what happened in Ukraine. Because we were able to have Ukraine be an innovation test bed for modern warfare that you can't get in the middle of the Nevada desert or at Fort Sill, where the Ukrainians are training now and the like. You can only get this in real time. And I think that there are heads of some of the services who are very much aware of this, and they're taking full advantage of it. But we are not telling this to members of Congress, and we're not telling it to the American people. So shame on us for not getting this word out.
Deborah, since you're so good on nuclear stuff, I'm going to throw a curve at you right now. We've talked about the fear of escalation as one reason why the administration and other countries in NATO have been reluctant to send more arms to Ukraine. Russian media are full of let's use nukes on the West. But one of the biggest bloviators on Russian TV, Solovyov, had on his program in the past few days retired General Brzezinski, who, while these guys were all, others on the panel were all bloviating about using nukes against Poland or Great Britain or France, basically said this is nonsense. Yes, of course, if NATO forces were attacking Russia, then our nuclear doctrine would say we should use nukes to defend the Russian state. Otherwise, this is crazy talk. So how do you interpret the fact that this general said this on Russian TV? And what does this mean for the way we should understand this issue?
Well, I think he was being perfectly rational. First of all, I've heard comments about moving nukes into Crimea. I don't think people understand what is required to support nuclear weapons, what kind of special forces you need to use them, how you protect the warheads, how the warheads are uploaded and used, what kind of safety measures, what you do for your own forces. So these are not things that you just roll out, put forward, and you can pop them off anywhere. So that's kind of a misnomer, the way the Russians do business on this. And we've watched this for years, and we've seen it in, Kaliningrad, so we've seen it pretty close by. So that's the first thing. The second thing is Russia's been told by China, by India, by Pakistan, by Iran, that use of nuclear weapons would undermine their whole architecture of having their nuclear deterrent be a threat to their enemies. So this sort of uneasy detente between India and Pakistan and Kashmir and elsewhere is based on not using these, but threatening to use them. China understands its efficacy of its nuclear deterrent. is based on a threat to use it, but not having someone do a one-off and then thereby undercutting China's largest threat that it has all over the Indo-Pacific. And certainly even Iran, who likes to keep this going vis-a-vis not only Israel, but many of the Gulf states and the like, would rather someone not talk about using these weapons, because then it undermines this fear that Iran likes to conjure up in the Levant and elsewhere. So I go back to the issue of escalation. I really don't any longer think escalation is the reason why the US and other countries aren't doing more. I think it's a more fundamental fear of what happens when Putin loses. I think it's more fundamental. I think it's Ukraine can win and Putin can lose. And I don't think people are having an easy time wrapping their arms around this concept. So on nuclear weapons, I'm not awake at night worrying about this. And I don't think it's as easy or as fruitful for Putin as some people think it would be.
Thank you. Okay, Leonid, we'll come to you and then we'll turn to audience questions. There seems to be growing infighting among Russian elites about the war and growing criticism of the war from uberhawks like Jürgen Strelkov, whom you mentioned. Is it good politics for Putin to conduct a new mobilization? As I think you know, Twitter's been afire with a possible or maybe a fake FSB order that would prevent draft-age Russian men from leaving the country. This is beginning to be part of a preparation for mobilization. If Moscow launches a new offensive, does Putin's future rest on its success? And what would it take for Russia to end its aggression in Ukraine?
Well, I'm not sure that I can give an advice to Mr. Putin because my only advice to him to commit suicide. But I'm afraid that mobilization is something he will do. He has no choice. He didn't stop it. He said that he stopped mobilization, but he lied. And of course, he will do it more and more because he can only oppose to a highly motivated and better armed army of Ukraine with the army of the last century, recruited by force and consisting of poorly trained soldiers. The only tactic he can use is the Stalin's tactic to overwhelm the enemy with the corpse of his soldiers. And this is only tactic in which he successful. So of course we'll have a new waves of mobilization. And if you want to stop Putin's aggression in Ukraine, if you want to stop him and therefore to protect yourself, so two things. Pray for Ukrainian soldiers and give Ukrainian offensive weapons. Give Ukrainian offensive weapons. Otherwise, you won't stop him. President Zelensky was absolutely right when he said that your help is not charity. Ukraine is fighting for the entire Western world, for democracy against the tyranny. There is very similar to the situation of the World War II, when in fact the war was for the freedom of people. And I think that the probability of Putin's using nuclear weapons is a little bit overestimated. It's not zero, of course, but it's not so high as it looks. Because if he's losing, I think his generals will not let him to do it. They don't want to die. They don't want to die together with him. They support him when he's a winner. They will not support him when he's a loser. And keep in mind that Putin's victory will lead to a terrible threat to the world. Just as Hitler did not stop by seizing the Sudetenland and Austria, so Putin will not stop. His goal is the destruction not only Ukraine, but the destruction of all the countries which was a part of the USSR's zone of influence, and the weakening of the West, changing the balance of power in the world, in his power. So it's Putin is existential threat now, existential for the Western civilization, or let's say for the world civilization. And you can stop him only defeating him. It's the only way. If, for example, when Ukrainians liberate all their territories, including Crimea, of course, I agree with Andrei 100%. If they do it, and after this, we'll have something like a peace agreement between Putin from one side and Ukraine and other world from another side. It's not the peace, it's just a ceasefire, because he will find new resources, he will reorganize his army, and he will attack again. The only stable peace, it's a destroying of this military, of this criminal state, as it was done in 1945 with another war criminal.
Thank you. I think we all would agree about the need to stop Putin in Ukraine, because he is in fact an existential threat for the West. Okay, we're turning to audience questions. We have a whole series of questions on retaking Crimea from Jack Krupansky, also a question from John Weiss on the same subject. I'm not going to go through them because there are a bunch. So they're all about how Crimea might be taken back. I think this has been addressed a little bit, but Andrei, I'll give you an opportunity to talk about this. How do you see Ukraine taking back Crimea? You've already discussed it some, but just briefly recap, and any new insights we'd appreciate.
We don't believe that Putin will go for any negotiations about that. We actually don't think that Putin will go for any negotiations, like real ones. I mean, other than just a drag of time. So, but certainly not on Crimea. So we think that diplomatic solution is possible, but it's possible with those leaders who will come after Putin, whatever this scenario will be. And then, yes, we do believe that military solution is possible. We believe that Russian forces will be exhausted by the time when we are getting to Crimea. It's possible to limit their capability. It's possible to neutralize the influence of the Black Sea Fleet, because it's actually, it's relying its assault capability on like a couple tens of the ships. And so it would be a joint campaign, joint forces campaign in different directions, which would address this issue. And of course, we do need assault weapons, and so of course we do need the support from the international community. But one of the reasons we are here and talking about that is to convince the international community that the half measures about winning this war are not actually the real measures. I mean, we should be absolutely clear about the format of the victory, and we just cannot let Russia keep this as the constant threat in the Black Sea region and the South Ukraine, Crimea, as some sort of a basis for its potential, another season of the campaign.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question for General Clark from Dr. Harlan Ullman. It is, do you think that retaking Crimea is possible without armor from the West? And given the size of the pro-Russian inhabitants there, is reoccupying it possible? General?
I think Ukraine does need armor from the West, as I said in my opening remarks. And I think that the Ukraine government itself is going to have to work on the plan for the reoccupation. Look, Crimea has been ethnically cleansed. So the inhabitants that were there in 2013 are not there today. The Tatars have been isolated and run out. Russians have moved in. This is typical of the way Russia works. So there's going to have to be a plan for the reintegration of Crimea into Ukraine. And I'm convinced that many of those Russians who are there, who moved in, they'd welcome being a part of Ukraine rather than being part of an isolated and dictatorial Russia. John, I want to mention two things that we haven't focused on while I've got the floor here.
Please.
One is we haven't really used the legal weapon effectively. We need to mobilize international legal support for the indictment of Vladimir Putin and his lieutenants. It's that simple. They have violated international law, and if international law is meeting, we need to put this forward. Now, the European leaders, American leaders, they're nervous about this because they say, well, if this happens, how will we talk to Putin? How will we negotiate with him? And, you know, the answer to that is he is a criminal. You can't trust anything he says. He's lied repeatedly. So is Lavrov and the rest. So this is not a real question. This is about concern about whether international law has meaning. And this is the clearest case for using international law and reestablishing its strength in the 21st century. Second thing we're not doing is we're not working the information war against Russia's populace, or I should say against Putin in working the Russian populace. He's able to put the lies forth, mobilize, accuse this of being a war against NATO and so forth. We don't see any impact, any effort, significant effort going in to changing the minds of ordinary Russians. Maybe a tough sell, but it's an essential element of moving forward. If we can destabilize Russian popular support for Putin, it makes everything that follows much easier.
Wes, thank you. Those are two excellent points. I should add that Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister of the UK, recently had a strong op-ed on going after the Kremlin leadership in international courts. Okay, we've got a question from Stuart Stott, which I think, again, is for you, Wes, but Deborah may want to comment on this as well, and Andre, too. He says, General Clark made a point on providing weapon systems need to standardize on types. For example, sending M1 Leopards and Challengers complicates the maintenance and support efforts. And he suggests selecting one weapon system in each category. For example, if the Swedes provide aircraft, the Germans supply tanks, US supply loitering drones, and so on. Does that make sense, in your opinion, Wes? And Deborah, too.
Sure, it might simplify logistics, but it doesn't really make sense in this case because none of these countries have sufficient weapons of the types that are required to be the sole supplier. So I think the burden is on the West and the suppliers of the tanks, the aircraft, or whatever, to establish the logistics chain. Look, this might have been really hard in the 1950s, 60s, or 70s, but with modern communications, with Amazon and companies like Amazon, it's very easy to connect the customer to the provider. And that software is out there now. You can get the parts that are needed, and you put separate units together around specific weapon systems. You train what we'd say, the operators and the second, third echelon mechanics on these specific systems, and then you run the parts requirements back to national inventory control points. I would say this also, it's way past time for the allied nations to establish contract maintenance support inside Ukraine. There's no reason why this isn't done. That makes no sense to pull stuff back to Poland. Let's get a maintenance system that works inside Ukraine and get that equipment that needs to be repaired back in the hands of the troops on a more expeditious manner.
Thank you. Okay, here's a question from Joe Morley Davies, which I think is really for you, Andre. It was mentioned that non-productive narratives still permeate the Western information space regarding Crimea. So his questions are are there different narratives that might help increase support for Ukraine in the global South? And perhaps more important to the topic, how can the Ukrainian population be psychologically prepared for rejoining Ukraine after 8+ years of occupation and Kremlin propaganda?
It's almost 9 years.
That's right.
Yeah, and yes, of course, the reintegration it should be an effort, and should be the whole campaign for reintegration, because there's lots of things happened during that period of time, and we have to be very careful. We have to be very sensitive to certain issues, and we have to be very direct and resolved about the other issues. Obviously, it will be difficult, but with a good planning and with a good support, it's possible. The key thing is that most of the people in Crimea, and particularly in some areas, and some like entrepreneurs and a lot of people who just want to live a normal life. I mean, they're struggling right now there, because Crimea currently is under totalitarian occupation. There's no freedom there. There's no rule of law. There are substantial issues with the environment, with environmental status. With there's a massive pressure on the small businesses. There's in fact like a de facto genocide of Crimean Tatars, because they've been subject of some serious human rights violations, and mildly speaking. So there will be a lot of people who are waiting for the deoccupation. So we cannot just say that what we see on TV is I mean, particularly Russian TV, is actually truth. So no, and we need to address all issues. So there must be a whole campaign, and there must be a substantial policy research effort about the reintegration and the occupation. Regarding the narratives, indeed, I mean, in the global South, generally, the attitude to this war is subjected to misunderstanding about the strategic picture. Generally, we see that in many different channels. When we monitor TV in India, in Arab countries, and many other places, people don't understand lots of things, and there's a lot of wrong narrative. So addressing that is not just about Crimea, it's generally of understanding the war as a whole. But we need to show the precedents. So, for example, one of the wrong precedents which has been sent around Crimea is that for years is the fact that annexation, that Russia declared it as Russian, it actually means something, and we should change our policy. We should change our approaches because of this fact. So de facto, the world accepted the annexation. Yes, there's been sanctions. There's been sanction regime, and officially there's been a rejection of the Crimea as a part of Russia. And of course, there's been a massive participation in Crimean platform, etc., etc. But the sanction regime was like very weak, and it didn't work, and it had like countless loopholes. And basically, there was no active plan on how to liberate Crimea. So there's lots of politicians like who said, okay, that's a reality. We should accept it, and we shouldn't do anything violent like a military campaign because Russia says now it's own, and it's included it officially in the structure. So guess what happened? Just recently, Russia annexed 4 more regions using exactly same mechanism as with Crimea, a fake referendum and a next day annexation, exactly same algorithm. So what we need to show to everybody is that if you are allowing these things to happen, they will continue. Appeasing Putin only means that he will continue those. So whatever works for him, he will repeat somewhere else, and so on. And we need to explain this to the whole world, because that's a reality.
Thank you. Okay, we have so many questions and very little time. We have one from John Innes. It's for you, Leonid. What are the prospects for Putin's removal, and who might succeed him?
Well, let's say first that it will not be the revolution. I don't believe in it at all. Of course, it will not be elections, because he will never allow elections. It could be the palace coup. I think it's the only good scenario for Russia now. Who will replace him? It doesn't matter, because anybody, even somebody from his very, very close team, this person or this group of persons, they will have the main goal, and the main goal to deserve excuse from the West for themselves. They do not care about Ukraine. They do not care about Russia. They care only about themselves and about their billions. Billions they have stolen during their professional career. So any person who will replace Putin will make serious steps back from his aggression and toward the West. And in this case, it will be very important which will be the position of the West. If you say, okay, you liberated Crimea, you liberated all Ukrainian lands, you even agreed to pay reparations, so it's okay. It will be your defeat. You must demand demilitarization. You must demand the control for the nuclear weapons. And I think that if you are strong enough, those who replace Putin will agree with you.
Leonid,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, we've got 2 minutes left. Andrea, I'll return the conversation to you. You set us off. Your concluding remarks, I think, would be welcome here.
For me, it's very simple. The global community, particularly Western community, which is playing a crucial role in helping Ukraine to win, needs to be absolutely clear about the format of winning. There shouldn't be any doubts about that the Putin needs to lose and Ukraine needs to win, and that includes Crimea. There's no half measures, as I said. There's no some kind of let's do it, but Crimea is some special case or something else, because that will actually set up a very wrong precedent. And so the strategic objectives with the half measures are not going to be achieved. Actually, we're going to set up we're going to achieve a wrong strategic objectives, because there still would be some negative consequences for the history to come, and we cannot afford that. Ukraine is not going to do that, by the way. So Ukraine is absolutely determined about that. And we welcome global community to join us in this vision and address the concerns, discuss this as many times as possible, study the possible campaigns, do any diplomatic measures, etc. But we're not going to accept some of the statements which we hear from some observers that, okay, let's just leave Crimea out. Let's just use it as a let's just not touch it, and so that is a conclusion. Let's address this honestly, and let's look at this and be very clear and very consistent about our strategy with this war. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, our hour is up. I'd like to thank our wonderful panel for this terrific conversation. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. We'll be doing more on Moscow's war in Ukraine in the weeks to come. Certainly by the end of this month, we'll do another event, and we look forward to seeing you then.